People come to me like, oh, the sex is completely buzzed out, but then you notice that the male that I'm working with, the person in a male body who's in a monogamous relationship with a woman, comes home, he's continually apologizing for being late, he's asking for permission for stuff, and you're like, dude, you're basically acting like a son and putting your wife into mother. No wonder the buzz is dead. Like you're putting her into this position of having to play mother to the part of you that's expressing as a 7-year-old with this particular theme. I'm using people pleaser as an example, but there's different core wounds and adaptive child strategies that play out that often create these awkward dynamics that put our partners into parent and us into child. And yeah, it kills the buzz, and it's not a healthy way to relate to our partner. Welcome to another episode of the Fathers, Sons, Brothers podcast, where we have conversations with men that empower them to become purpose-driven leaders and legendary lovers. I'm excited to share today's bonus episode of the podcast with you, where I have a conversation with Willow Green about the topic of death, relationships, and why there's no such thing as personal growth. This is a really interesting and powerful conversation for me, and it touches on a theme in my life that's been so important for me over the last decade. When I went through a personal transformation in 2014, I realized that I had been trying to do most of the things in my life, even the most important things, on my own. And since that realization, I've realized how much easier it has been for me to achieve the things that I want in my life when I invest in mentors, guides, and coaches. And so over the last decade, I've probably spent close to $100,000 and worked with multiple different coaches in all the areas of my life that are important. And the one thing that comes up for me time and time again is the recognition that there is so much power in a group coaching container, as in one coach or facilitator is leading a group of us through a specific process. And these could be around sexual mastery, relationships, health and body, money, business, any of those types of environments where I'm a participant and I'm going through a coaching program with a guide who's coaching a group of us, all going through maybe similar areas or similar challenges that we want to level up in our lives. One of the reasons that this is so powerful is you're not alone on the journey where it's just you and the coach. You have the ability to be able to access something that I call the hive mind, based on the idea of a hive from a beehive, where there's multiple different connections and multiple different people that all come together to solve a similar challenge while being guided by somebody who is perhaps a little bit further down the path than you are in that particular area. What happens there is you don't only get the ability to be able to see the reflection and get the feedback from the coach that you're working with, as you do when you're working one-on-one, but you get the opportunity to hear other people's stories who might have similar themes and challenges that you're sitting with, but maybe you didn't know how to articulate them, or you didn't know that you had the same challenge, or they have something that perhaps gets leveled up through the container that you're working with this particular coach. And that becomes something that you can implement in your own path, whether it's a journey on your money story or implementation in your business, or a reframe that you have around your sex life, whatever it is. Those group coaching containers are super, super powerful. So today's conversation actually comes from a fellow participant that was part of a group coaching container that finished up probably about 2 months ago. Willow Green and I were part of a coaching container with a really powerful teacher called Jesse Elder, and there was so much magic in this. I think it ended up being almost a 4-month training container supporting us to get clear on our business and help us really level up what it was that we were bringing to the world. Willow is an advocate for death, and she's doing really, really important work around supporting the Western culture to become a little bit more okay with death. The world that I grew up in and many of the people that I work with are scared of death. We don't like talking about it. We live in a world where we celebrate spring and the energy of newness and all the excitement of new things, but we don't do endings very well. We don't do death very well. We're often quite scared of death and we don't want to have conversations about it. And so it felt really powerful to have a conversation with her about her view on death and some of my views around relationships and how the end of certain relationships, call it conscious endings or the deaths of relationships, is a place that we don't spend a lot of time. And if you don't spend much time being conscious of how your relationships are ending, you don't get to reflect back on those relationships and take the lessons and integrate them into your next relationships. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to share a really powerful series of group trainings that we are hosting called Kings and Queens. This is exciting because it's in the topic and the space of relationships, which is probably the topic that I'm most excited to teach and to coach. And I'm also excited because after doing almost a decade of men's work, we're creating a coaching container for men and women inside this series of 5 webinars that's really going to share some practical tools and tips that will support you to be able to level up your relationships and your intimate life with the people that you care about. I'll leave some details about how you can access that training in the show notes for this episode. But for now, please enjoy this conversation between myself and Willow Green.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Willow Green, and I'm an advocate for deaf. And I am here today with my friend Gareth, who is a relational growth advocate. He is host of a Fathers, Sons, Brothers podcast, and he's a men's coach. Hi, Gareth. Welcome today.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. Let's jump right in. And I would love to know, what is a relational growth advocate?
I believe that we have been given perhaps an incorrect idea about personal growth that I think comes from, yeah, it's based on a false premise that I think came up in the 70s, which was like this idea that we all have personal work to do and that, somehow once we've done our personal work, then we will be the best version of myself in order to be able to go out in the world and serve my mission, or that once I've done all the personal work that I need to do, that then I'll be ready to attract the right type of partner into my life. And I think relational growth for me is that there is no growth without the relationships and the recognition that we live in connection to one another. We're social primates. And so, in order for us to be able to grow, we need to be in connection with one another. We can't survive without the connections that we have. And our relationships give us really the opportunity to be able to see where our own growth comes from. Nothing is going to give you more opportunity to realize where your personal growth is through your relationships. And so there is no growth without relationships. And so a relational growth expert is really just the idea that understanding that in through these relationships that we form, whether they're romantic connections or business connections or family, that they're going to give us continual opportunities to reflect where we have space and work to do. And underneath all of that is that if this is such an important piece and these relationships are so integral to having a healthy and meaningful life, we don't get a lot of relationship training. Like, we don't know how to select partners. We don't get taught how to choose the partner that comes into our life. And then when we have partnership, whether it's a marriage or a relationship of some sorts, how do we navigate these challenges? Like, all of us come into this matrix as a function of being born to imperfect parents in a crazy world that tells us continually that we're not enough. And so we have these core wounds that are going to be reflected in our relationships, and we don't know how to develop these. Like, until a few years ago, I didn't even know what core wounds were. And suddenly I'm like realizing that for most of my life, I've been navigating relationships without a map, without a toolkit. And so that's really been my path over the last decade, is to really understand these phases of relationship, how to select partnership, how to manage partnership, and equip yourself with the tools to be able to show up fully for yourself and then show up fully for your partners. Relationship tools like core wounding and communication frameworks, etc. And then, maybe in line with the theme that you're talking about, not all relationships are meant to last forever. And there's a natural transition sometimes, or a death of a relationship. And how do we go through those transitions gracefully so that we can take the lessons of what we had in a relationship, learn and integrate from those, and then move forward and attract partners that perhaps use what we've learned from our past connections to facilitate more healthy and wholesome connection in the future. So that's what it means to me.
That's beautiful. And there's a lot there. And I really want to go to, because a lot of people understand what a healthy relationship is, or at least not what it is or what they desire with it. But what you touched on, the death and the ending of a relationship, and then the building of a new and gaining what was learned from that. I would like to dive deeper into that, and listen to you talk a little bit more about giving oneself permission to end a relationship and kind of what they learn within that, and then how to prepare for the next.
Mm. I think I want to start with the idea that we've been handed a false sense of what relationship should look like. I mean, the idea of happily ever after is not actually true. Like, relationships start, and then you go through a phase of I call it the pre-tragic. It's the part of the relationship where everything feels amazing. We're in the honeymoon phase. I'm showing the best version of myself. I'm looking for the golden shadow in my romantic partner. And for a while, it's amazing. The sex is juicy. We haven't had to have many money conversations. And this phase of the relationship tends to be quite easy. And I think that's where Disney and all these romantic comedies put a full stop and expect that that's how a relationship is supposed to look. And so if you have that idea and then you go out into the world and have a relationship, pretty soon you get to a place where I got to a couple, maybe a decade ago, which was like, oh wow, this is not it at all. Like I haven't found my happily ever after. I've found people that I love, but then it goes badly sideways and we end up fighting and it's like, ooh, I must have the wrong person. Let me find the next one. Only to find this pattern repeating again and again and again. And so going into a relationship with this false sense that somehow you're going to find the one and it's going to be cruisy for the rest of your life, it's going to set you up for disappointment and failure every single time. The reframe for me is the recognition that your relationship starts at the end of the pre-tragic, the tragic part when it's like you and me are in a connection. We've gone for the first 6 months or 5 years, and we're suddenly hitting this place where it's like, shit, stuff's coming up. I'm suddenly realizing that you're not perfect, and I'm starting to get feedback from you that I'm not perfect. And so we're in this place where all the gnarly stuff is coming out, and we're grown up enough to recognize that actually this is what a relationship is about. And now is when the real work starts. Your triggers are your treasures. These are your opportunities to see where you trigger, and the work that you have to do rests in these triggers. And when you start to look at your relationship as an opportunity or a container for your personal growth, to become a better version of yourself, to show up fully, to stand next to this being that you've chosen to go on this adventure with, knowing that there's going to be stuff, that's the journey that you go on in a relationship. So that's, I think, the first piece, the fact that you get to this tragic stage where the person's not perfect and it starts to become difficult. I've pulled my ripcord on so many relationships at that point, thinking that, oh, the next one will be better, only to recognize it's not, and that actually the relationship is doing exactly what it's supposed to be and give me a vehicle to be able to see what is mine to do and create a space for the mirror that will be for my partner for their work to do is the part of the relationship. So that's the first piece. Like recognize first of all that it's not going to be happily ever after. And if you've got that and it keeps coming up short, I think that's it. So I'll take a breath there and I can share the death of relationships as well if you have anything on that you want to ask me
Well,
on.
I just want to recap and make sure that I heard you correctly in that, and grasp like little juicy nuggets of wisdom. I love that you said the triggers are the treasures. And when we grow up enough, we recognize the triggers are the treasures and that those are the opportunities for growth within the relationship rather than the lesser mature versions of us that pull the ripcord and run during that. We realize, wow, we are able to recognize the patterns within ourselves, within our relations, and be able to see that right now, when we hit that point where we used to run, that right there is the sign of growth. And I also gather from that both people have to both parties in the relation need to also recognize that is the opportunity and then consciously choose one another to do the work. And so
Yeah.
again, that takes the relationship to the place where, okay, did we pick a partner that's willing to do the work with us?
Yep. Yeah. The conscious selection up front is important. So, like, hopefully you don't get to the stage and then go like, oh, this is interesting. We've been together 5 years. You want to travel and I want to build my career. Like, we haven't had this discussion, or like even bigger, you want to have kids. I don't want to have kids. Like, conscious relating for me is being conscious at all three phases of this relationship. Selecting up front is like, what is it that I really want? And the people and couples that I've worked with, this is kind of a hard thing to do. We don't know what the fuck we want. Me in the past, I was choosing based on a wounded part of myself that thought if I chose a good looking partner, that would make myself valid in the world. But I failed to see some of the other areas of that particular person that perhaps didn't line up, like, maybe an intellectual connection or a physical connection or a desire to travel or to not travel or to build family. Like, so being conscious of each of these phases of relationship is important. So yeah, hopefully by the time you get to this place of, first of all, consciously going into it, knowing that this relationship is going to have trouble. Trouble means shit's going to come up. but that we're choosing to go on this adventure together, that's conscious at the beginning. I hopefully didn't just choose somebody who looked great because they're in a beautiful body, only to realize that this person's not awake, they don't want to do the work, and they're looking for happily ever after. You're conscious enough to know that this is going to be a transformational container that's going to bring stuff up, and we're ready to do the work. And then you get to that place and be like, oh, sorry, we're not. So, yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's all about making sure that we're on the same page with this stuff. And it has to do with some of these types of elements, but also things like values, like what are the things that are valuable to you, like our choices and where we choose to spend our time, what it is that is important to you are the values that you hold dear to you. And you want to find a partner that doesn't have all the same values, but the top 3 to 4 values should be aligned in order to be able to make a relationship work, because having conflicting values means that the underlying source code that makes you feel what makes life meaningful for you and where you want to choose to spend your time should match with the other person. And yeah, there's a process for doing that, but I think bringing awareness to that first phase really helps set you up for when the relationship gets to this tragic phase where things do start to reveal themselves and the difficulties start to come, that you're in a place of like, okay, cool, we know we've got this because we both committed to personal growth, and we know that our next step is family because we've had these discussions. So yeah, I agree that there's definitely a level of consciousness in that first and second phase that's required.
Thank you for bringing that to really bringing that to light. I would definitely agree with you on that. I know you say how much we learned. I know I've learned so much throughout my own personal relationships. Now I actually have contracts, and I have 3 or 4 pages of questions that I go through when I work with my own clients as well. Really digging in deep to even how much sex, not even just what do you want to do, travel, but what's important sexually, what's important as far as eating wise, what's important with sharing our time with other people and going deep. So I really value how much you are bringing a consciousness and awareness to all of this too, and giving people permission and helping them understand that every phase of the relationship is important, but the most important is making sure that they're together in the first place. The other thing that I've noticed throughout that is when negotiating and having those conversations, it brings up all the insecurities in the honeymoon phase. And so it really has opened my eyes to how one works through conflict resolution and being able to work with that while we're in a peaceful place, so that when there is heightened emotion, it opens the door to understanding how we communicate, and if this is a safe relationship to move forward, if we can communicate and understand the levels that we're having an emotional relationship, a physical relationship, as well as all of the other relationships that are happening within our own individual experience and the shared one.
So what I heard you say is you're talking about, are we having the difficult conversations early enough, even when things are still smooth, to see how we play when things might get difficult? Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And sharing hopes and dreams. Yeah. So that basically just exploring the boundaries and the safety of to see how it's going to play out.
There's this way of looking at life that I've been using in my own world, which is like you get to choose your hard, meaning life is inevitably difficult and you get to choose that. In a relationship, it's like, it's hard to have difficult conversations with your partner, but it's also hard to not have difficult conversations and then, go through divorce. That's really difficult. You get to choose which ones those are. It's not easy to sit down and be like, this is what's coming up for me today, or in the early phases, as you're talking about, it's like, oh, I really want to be with this person, but I get a sense she might want to have kids. Let's just not have the difficult conversation and see what happens later. All right, cool. That's like skipping going to gym, you know? Yeah, you
Mhm.
can you can not do it. And, in a few months' time, you'll probably start to get sick if you continually avoid it. The hard that you choose can be something that comes as a consequence of not doing something now, or sitting down and having the hard conversation that sounds like, hey, I get a sense from what you said last night that you're really keen to start a family and have kids. I don't know if that's my truth. Can we have this conversation? That's fucking hard and grown up to do. And in the early stages, you may be like, oh, this could burn the bridges. This might cut off the opportunity me to continue the physical connection that I want. Maybe I've already created a future timeline where you and I are going to be together. You can choose to ignore that stuff if you want to, but these are the choices that you get to make as an adult, which is, as you said, even when it is feeling cruisy, how do you start practicing having these authentic conversations linked to your own desires, these values that we spoke about, the questions that you're touching on there, which is like, this is what I want in partnership, and my desires are sacred. I'm allowed to want what I want, And this process of engaging and exploring with this person, even while the sex is juicy and it all feels fun and we're getting to know each other, have these conversations early so that you can save yourself and the other person some time if there's stuff that's not genuinely aligned. Because it's not like they suddenly get better when things then get difficult. It's not like you can solve it then. In fact, it's probably more likely that you identified some of these kinks early on. And I have this from my own relationships when I reflect on them, which is at some point someone's like, oh, this person, blah, blah, blah. And there's like a whole buildup of stuff. And then you ask them the question of like, when did you first notice this? Not consciously, like when did you hear that small voice inside you that was like, I think this could be a thing, but you chose to ignore it? That for me has been true quite often early in a relationship. There's like some sort of call them orange flags of like, I don't know if this is really it, but I just ignored it because I was, hopelessly lost in the romance of what this could be. But yeah, the more you mature with relationships, the more you have these tools, the more conscious you are of how you choose to relate and have these conversations with your partner, the more you can get to the richness of what's really alive for both of you. And that's the best place to build a solid relationship from.
I love that you're sharing all of this from your wisdom, and that everything you're doing and your expertise is gained from trial and error, and that you're sharing all of this to empower other people to learn through your own growth and help them experience an easier way and really bridge the connection. It's beautiful and so needed.
Thank you. I can share honestly that actually, this polished version of me that says these things is actually a work in progress of the version of me that has had to go through my own trials and tribulations of relationship. I've navigated sex addiction has been a theme in my life from a teenager, and it outplayed in my life as something that I ran to make myself feel better at times. And my own, as much as I've said that there's no such thing as personal growth, it's all relational growth. That is it. The relationships that were around me were the reflection of the work I needed to do in myself in order to be able to integrate the young version of Gareth who moved to a new school and felt like he didn't quite fit in. And when he got kissed by a girl, it was the first in his class to do that. And suddenly, in that moment, I was reflected by my brothers that I was amazing. And I was like, oh, that's the thing. I just need to have women in my life to make myself amazing. And that
Mm.
became the strategy, unbeknown. That was completely unconscious. I'm sharing this now as a post reflection of what happened, but I didn't realize that that was the trigger that actually got me to understand how to connect with women in my life, girls when I was in school, and later on women in my life. That was actually a strategy that I developed to protect or make myself feel better for a part of myself that didn't feel like I was enough. And that's not the place to relate from. So yeah, the relational growth that I've experienced, and I think working with other people in this sort of healing slash coaching space, I think the only work that we get to share is the work that we've done in our own lives. I mean, I couldn't be a divorce coach. I've never been married. I couldn't be a parenting coach. I can give you ideas of how I think you can do it, but the best parenting coach is someone who's a parent. So I only get to say this through my own lens, and going through my own school of hard knocks of learning the hard way, integrating these things and continually evolving as I go through it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that reflection. And it's a work in progress. Every single day I'm learning more about myself through the relationships that I'm in.
That's beautiful. I think we're all a work in progress. When we think that we've actually got it mastered is when we need to relook.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. There's nothing more to say on that. That's what it is. We don't get to the end.
So how is having gotten to that root process, or the root cause, and understanding that kiss was a major experience in your life that created a ripple effect, and how has uncovering that shifted your relationships and your ability to connect?
Hmm. I think there's only two things that we need to do in this life, and one of them is, find out what is ours to fix, like a process of recognizing what is your core wound, and then integrate that through this lens of you are enough. You are enough exactly as you are. You're a child of God. You may have a weird imprint from your parents or from the society that we live in, but you're enough exactly as you are. So just coming back to loving ourselves, accepting ourselves, forgiving ourselves, being completely in love with ourselves is our work to do. And a part of that process, the second part, I think, is this part of reparenting, recognizing that these wounds, these these parts of ourselves that didn't feel like I was enough when I moved to a new school because I was the smallest kid in my grade. Like all of that stuff is just an imprint that was created from a young version of myself that was trying to make sense in the world. And so I think the only work that we do is recognize what is that thing? What is your core wound? The answer for me is the fear of rejection, because what stemmed from there was I was suddenly accepted when I had a woman in my life or a girlfriend or something. So that made that core wound of the fear of rejection feel okay, because when I wasn't rejected through my relationships, then I was okay. The solution is reparenting. Nobody's going to reparent that younger version of me any better than I can do it for myself, including my romantic partners. And that's often the place. It's like, I'm in the arms of a lover now, so therefore I must be okay. But if they were to leave, then I'm suddenly not okay. It's like I'm asking them to parent me, and that's that young part that's connecting from the 10-year-old version of me that's hoping that my partnership is going to make me be okay as a grown-up. And that's not it. It's recognizing that young version of ourselves and then going on a journey to reparent ourselves. That means standing as the grown up that I am now, the mature adult that I am now, and holding that young, uncertain version of myself whenever I'm like, oh, I don't feel good in my world today. Let me get on a dating app or go and try and connect with somebody to get that need met from an unfulfilled place. That was the loop for me. So I think the two pieces for me on this journey are really, what is your core wound? Know what that shit is, because you have it, even if you came from a perfect family. As a function of being born into this world where capitalism always tells you that you're not enough, you have a wound of not enough. I'm almost certain of it, you know? It's very rare that people don't have at least a thread or two of what a core wound is, to know what those things are. And then, welcome to the Earth School. You're going to be the grown up. You've got to reparent this part of yourself. Build a relationship with young Gareth. I have a completely different persona. His name's Charlie. He's a young, polite boy that I got an imprint from as I was growing up, and I get to know this version of myself that's continually moving through the world, making sure that I don't get rejected. And I have to hold him like a 7-year-old. But I noticed that this part is also alive, and I can share this because it's a practical application of how I use this. As you build a relationship with this young version of yourself, some people call it the adaptive child or the wounded child or something like that. Treat them the same way you would treat a normal 7-year-old who needs some support, because that's what we do. But we tend to cast them aside, not be aware of them, just leave them in the corner flapping and screaming. But where it actually came out in my world was I was on this path of wanting to create content. I have a podcast called the Father, Sons, Brothers podcast, where I want to have conversations that support men. And some of those conversations were around sex and intimacy. And I noticed that I had this body of work that I was really excited to share with the world, but I was feeling so much resistance to actually press play and go live on Facebook and talk about it. And I checked in with myself. I'm like checking with all the various parts of myself that exist inside. I've got the king who wants to do the work, and I've got a CEO in my inner world that's planning everything. And I'm like, why am I feeling so resistant? Charlie, the 7-year-old, is concerned that one of my mom's friends on Facebook may hear me talking about sex. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. The 7-year-old version of me has actually got the microphone making the decision and creating a big mess about this. And it's like, okay, take a breath. Let's hold this young part. Thank you. We really appreciate you. And you've kept us safe all these years. And you're a 46-year-old grown man now that has work to do and a mission to serve, serving men, talking about love, relationships, and marriage, and you can't not do this. So this decision today is being made by the king rather than the 7-year-old. And this has been like a practical application of how I've actually used this like adaptive child, inner child work to recognize where sometimes there's some 7-year-old screaming inside that's holding us back from showing up for, whatever it is. That's just an example in my own work.
Hey, FSB crew, a quick message to say 97% of you who watch or consume this podcast are not subscribed. Subscribing to the show really supports us to be able to grow and reach more people, as well as include and improve the quality and caliber of guests that we have on this show. Our goal is to get this number down to 70%. And so if you have ever received any value from the content and conversations on this podcast, please consider subscribing. It really supports us and the work that we're doing. Now, back to the show.
That's powerful. And there's a couple different things that I wrote down that you said throughout that. One, that when you recognize and find that core wound and you're raising your inner self, that it's very important when in a relationship or in working on relational issues to understand that we have to reparent ourselves, to not look at a partner for that, not depend on a partner. And So it's changing the dynamic from a possibly codependent relationship to a self-authorized self-parenting experience. And so it's almost
Exactly.
like we're taking our, I don't want to say taking our power back from our parents, but essentially that's the only way I know how to say it right now, but it's choosing to empower oneself and really make sure to not overlap that in the relationship. That, and then when that recognition comes and when we're able to do that, to be able to sit with that version of ourselves and sit in and explore the resistance, and you were able to then tap into the 7-year-old aspect and then consciously reframe and parent and support that aspect of yourself and bring it into present day.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. Um, there's something also that happens. I think you touched on it there, which is if if you're not aware of that young part of yourself, that adaptive child part, the 7-year-old, and it comes up in relationship, it also switches the other partner, your partner, into parent and you into child. Meaning, if the 7-year-old is making the decision sometimes or showing up with that frequency of how I was when I was 7, because that's the nature of this young part that can show up in your expression. It actually shifts. I'm going to use my partner, for example. It shifts my partner into mother and me into son. And it's a very unsexy thing to do in a relationship because, if you're continually playing this part of looking for permission or people pleasing with your partner, it's basically the 7-year-old version of me that was doing that to make sure that I got my needs met and that I was, receiving the love of my parents. Great when you're 7, not so sexy when you're 40 and you're looking to create a relationship. People come to me like, oh, the sex is completely buzzed out. But then you notice that the male that I'm working with, the person in a male body who's in a monogamous relationship with a woman, comes home, he's continually apologizing for being late, he's asking for permission for stuff. And you're like, dude, you're basically acting like a son and putting your wife into mother. No wonder the buzz is dead. Like you're putting her into this position of having to play mother to the part of you that's expressing as a 7-year-old with this particular theme. I'm using people pleaser as an example, but there's different core wounds and adaptive child strategies that play out that often create these awkward dynamics that put our partners into parent and us into child. And yeah, it kills the buzz, and it's not a healthy way to relate to our partners.
To someone who is not aware of those patterns within themselves yet, you gave a couple examples in that about how it would show up. What other ways would it show up? Insecure. A lot of it is just in insecurities. Would that be how someone could recognize it in themselves and help them open the door to being willing to do this work and seeing those parts of themselves?
Ask that question another way.
Um, when the 7-year-old or the version of ourselves makes itself present, if we're not aware of it, how would we recognize that in ourselves if we haven't done the work or think that we have and have maybe not gone deep enough? What do these patterns, how do they show up to someone who isn't sure?
I think it's triggers. It's going to be the triggers or the uncomfortable dynamics that you feel in a relationship reflected back to you. So sometimes they don't look like there's patterns that have got a lot of energy, for example, that come forward, like for example, maybe aggression or a short temper or anger or something like that can come from suppressed resentment. Like if you're not getting your needs met in a relationship, for example, because you're continually pleasing your partner, you're suppressing your own needs, which you can do for a while, but eventually that starts to build as resentment and then it can show as anger. But you can also start to withdraw from a relationship, like start to close up and stonewall, and then your partner is going to be giving you the data back. So all of the things that look like shit in a relationship, that look like fights or arguments in a relationship, is the opportunity for you to dive in to see what is your work to do there. And yeah, I think that's really a chance to see what were the strategies that you had to get through your life as a child. And they're very often modeled as a function of the caregivers that we had. So and there's two elements to it. One of them is like almost doing the exact opposite of a parent or modeling, doing the same as the parent. So sometimes, let's say, for example, you had an abusive father, you may have been told by your mother, who was more present as a caregiver, don't ever be like your dad. So you never wanted to express anger. You never had a reference point for healthy anger. And so you withdraw and you never want to see anger in a relationship. And if any like loud noises or a raising of voice comes up in your partner, you completely withdraw because you didn't feel safe as a child. So that, for example, could be how you see it. Um, you may have seen, a parent being in a position of being super submissive to another parent, and that's a strategy that you adapted as a result of seeing that and be like, okay, that's how men behave around women, because you had an overpowering mother who was, maybe handpecking the father, and so that became the strategy. So you'll start to see them in your own relationship, but they normally come from how you were raised by your caregivers or what was modeled in the relationship that you saw.
Perfect. What I got from that too, and to summarize it, is it comes out as our communication and conflict patterns and how we move through those, and that's what arises. And it really exposes where we have done the work to create the new communication pattern, or where we stuck and have the opportunity to work through it.
Communication and conflict patterns is a great way to say it. It's exactly what it is. Yeah. What happens in those conflict moments, and how do I choose to communicate it? Am I actively engaging in the conversation, or am I withdrawing? Because that'll give you a sign as to whether you have an integrated or mature relationship with that part.
Beautiful. And you opened up earlier, before I started asking a bunch of questions, about your how death fits into this, and I would love to explore that aspect of it.
Along with the happily ever after story that we've been given, I think, well, the world that I was brought up in, we were also given this sense, and I had an idea that relationships were supposed to be forever. You meet somebody, and because you went to school together, they should stay in your life forever. And somebody shared this once with me, that people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I think a lot of us have this idea that relationships should be lifetime relationships because of the maybe the frame that we have with marriage, or the world that we were brought up in. But sometimes people come into your life just for a season, a holiday romance that lasts for a certain time, or a reason, like someone comes in for a certain amount of time to teach you something really important. So that relationship is like, I needed that for a specific reason. And I think if we continually try to put all of these three categories of relationships into lifetime relationships, you're missing the point, because they're not all supposed to be lifetime relationships. So I think a couple of things. I think sometimes in the world that we live in now, we have come from a world which is so consumerist and so much choice in terms of our ability to be able to choose when it comes to material possessions, when it comes to where we live, when it comes to jobs. We pick and choose so quickly that I think we've actually applied some of that thinking to our relationships. And we have the sense like, too difficult, I'll just go on to the next person. It's much easier to be poly, because then I don't have to really go deep with somebody, or as soon as I do go deep with somebody, it starts to bring up my stuff. So I'm just going to move on. So I think there's a bit of an important conversation to be had about the generation that came before us, that, relationships lasted longer because they came from a generation where if something was broken, you fixed it. You didn't just throw it away. And I think we have the sense of like, oh, this is not working, I'll throw it away, just like a pair of trainers. My parents have a dining room suite that they've got when they were married, and they've still got it. Like most people now change it every season. And we bring that same way of thinking into relationships. So I want to start with that, because I think making sure that you consciously select your partners well, that you go through the stuff we spoke about at the beginning of this call to select partners well, and then commit to staying with that partner, I think is an important journey. And then using some of the tools we spoke about here in how to manage conflict and how to have difficult conversations, I think is an important part. And relationships end, especially if you're in the early stages of maybe assessing or dating people to see whether this is your life partner. I encourage my clients to go on a lot of dates. Don't just choose somebody and then, all right, cool, I'm going full on here. Like, use the opportunity to assess whether this person's good for you, whether how they communicate, do you share the same values, have those couple of conversations, go on multiple dates, see if the intimacy flows in the way that you want. And when it doesn't, consciously end that relationship. This is the death part. It's like, it's okay for these things to end. But just as conscious as you were going into it, don't just ghost somebody and hope that it's going to be okay for the next time. It's really about recognizing, okay, what can I do to integrate this time that I've spent with this being? Like, what worked? What did I really love about them? What didn't I love? How do I take what unfolded in this connection to really support me to be able to call in the next possible person? And so we talk a lot in like the sort of pop culture about, like, we've got a very strong energy around spring and summer. Find your ideal soulmate, get into a relationship, stay married forever. But we don't, there's some talk about breakups and how tragic they are. And I think we could do it. I know your work is a lot around this, but just recognizing the beauty of endings. How conscious are we around the endings of our connections? And this is the nature of life. There's the only one thing that is certain in this life is the impermanence of everything in it. And relationships are part of that. And there's going to be relationships that come into your world, romantic or otherwise, and some of those relationships are going to fade out of your life. How conscious you are through those transitions, I think really gives you a PowerPoint to be able to harness the gold and the lessons that came from the time that you spent with this person and be like, this was amazing. These are things that I don't want in a relationship, and use that data to update your list of things that you want in your next partner. But I think also if you do it unconsciously, what tends to happen is you attract the same person that has the same challenges that you had before, and you don't realize what it is because you haven't taken the time to integrate it. So we actually have a series of trainings coming up. The first training is going to be on relationship endings and recognizing how to reflect on what you've taken from your past connections so that you don't repeat the patterns of the things that you don't want. But if you don't bring conscious awareness to this death of relationships, you are going to continue to repeat those patterns because you're not even sure what it was that got you into that relationship in the first place and then made the relationship feel uncomfortable enough for you to want to leave it or for it to end.
I'm so excited to hear more about that, and that you're actually doing how to end a relationship and conscious endings and death of relationships. It's, to me, I think it's the most important part. Because what we do with everything, like, that's the wisdom, that's everything that we have to take into rebirthing the new experience. So I'm really excited for you and the work that you're doing, and the success and the feedback and all of the testimonials of the people that have been going through your program. It's amazing to read and explore, and I'm excited to see where this goes for you. When you talk about the death threat and preparing for the next relationship, is there a time frame or a talk about the process of reflecting before then opening up to the next relationship? Is there like a time frame, and is that all focused on reflection and then rebuilding? And is there a segue of then possibly choosing to upgrade our own behavioral and communication patterns before then re-exploring a new partnership or a new relationship?
Beautiful question. At the basis of all the relationship training that I do and the work that I do is what I call the soulmate relationship. And there's only one soulmate relationship that you have, and that's the relationship that you have with yourself. There's nobody else in your life that's going to be there with you from the moment you come into this realm till the moment you transition out, except your relationship with yourself. And so the idea that a soulmate is going to show up and be the one for you, I think is another false premise. There's going to be people that you can journey with in your life, but underneath everything is the relationship that you have with yourself. And the more healthy your relationship is with yourself, the more integrated you are with these various parts. We spoke about the adaptive child and we spoke about the king, but I have this concept called the inner marriage, which is really the recognition that we have both masculine and feminine energies alive inside of us. Doesn't matter what body you live in. And the more integrated you are with these two parts, or that I call the inner marriage, is going to be reflected in the relationships that you have outside. And so the question of when's a good time to potentially get back into a relationship with somebody else, for me, is really a question of when are you in a position that you feel like you're in a really whole and healed place, that you've processed whatever was from that last relationship, really tuned into your relationship with yourself, and that you've, yeah, taken the lessons, done the post game, allowed yourself just some time to breathe and grieve the relationship that's no longer in your life, and yeah, move back into the space of connecting again when it feels good. That's something I advise my clients on, and we work together on it if they need a mirror to reflect that back. But it's really a function of their own choice of what feels good for them. I often suggest a period of conscious celibacy for people, to really come back to your own energy, not to share your energy with somebody else, because, and this is my own story as well, like there can be a part of like, oh, that wasn't comfortable. I'll feel comfortable in the arms of somebody else. But again, it's not necessarily an empowered place. It's more a wounded place that I'm using to source love from a place of connecting with somebody else, rather than coming back to my own energy, settling, doing a post game, integrating, grieving, seeing what's next, sticking with my own energy, continuing to circulate my sexual energy, but not sharing it with anybody else, and then approaching the next possible relationship from an empowered and, yeah, a more integrated place. So it's not a specific time. I guess it would have to do with the healing as a rule of thumb, I would say if you've been in a really long, tumultuous relationship, you probably need a bit more time than if you've been on 4 dates with somebody. You might need a couple of weeks after that. So yeah, it doesn't really matter about time. But I think you're your own adult in this again. You're the one who's going to make the decision as to whether you think you're moving out into the dating world again from an empowered place of like, I'm ready to have somebody to share my life with and bring myself completely fully, or oh, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. I need a partner to make myself feel better. There's two very different frequencies with which to go out into the world and look for connection again, or to source partnership.
Yes. And there's three things there that I want to go deeper on that you touched on.
Yes.
One is acknowledging that the ending of a relationship, there's grief. With every death, there is so much grief. And excuse me, leading up to the ending, the death, whether it's the end of the relationship, the death of a body, any ending, there's a lot of anticipatory grief too that most people don't even talk about because they're not even aware of how to put a name to it or what it is. They just know there's this intense feeling, and then there's this ending, and then there's this grief, which you talked about dealing with. And the other two things that I really value are conscious celibacy. I went through conscious celibacy and really I chose to be alone with myself and spent a long time after my own traumas and my own issues, healing my own wounds. And that conscious being alone and choosing to figure out and explore oneself and one's sensations within oneself and understand that is so powerful, which leads to the next thing that I want you to go deeper on, which is the sexual energy within itself when we play with ourselves. I know what it's like inside women, and I've worked with men too, but I'm not a man and I don't have that experience, and I understand the sexual energy. My stuckness was rage, and I know rage, passion, sexual energy, they're all the same, and it's the more that we feel it, just depends on what end of the spectrum we're at, but it's all on the same spectrum and within, until we actually pull that energy up into our heart and then express it in a healthy way. And so I know that that's a lot, but those three things are very powerful.
Maybe start with the last one because it's a big topic. It's not something that gets spoken about a lot, and I think it's really important. That soulmate relationship, the powerful relationship that you develop with yourself, is not just, do I know the parts of myself and am I integrated with myself? It also includes the sexual relationship that you have with yourself, meaning how connected are you to your own sexual life force? How able are you to arrive at your sexual partner's self-activated? So imagine the same way that I explained earlier, you don't want to arrive at your relationship from a place of neediness and longing for your partner, because that's not an empowered and full place. You want to arrive completely full, completely expressed, and then you attract somebody who is vibrating in the same way. That's how you connect from a full and a healthy place. The same is true with our sexual life force, but not a lot of men, and I think a lot of women either, have a reference point for what this means. And I think what that looks like is we move into our intimate relationships and we're hoping that our partner is going to be able to show up and be able to activate us so that we can have, sexual intimacy with our partners. I teach men through conscious celibacy that you're not connecting with others, you're cultivating that sexual energy with yourself, but it includes a healthy self-pleasuring practice where you're actually connecting with yourself using self-pleasure that doesn't only have to include masturbation, but also just includes re-establishing a healthy relationship with your body and your sexual life force. It includes, how do I like to be touched, listening to the body in a way that we don't often do as men. We have a program of what it means to get ourselves turned on, and often that has to do with porn, fantasy, or like a pattern that we've run multiple times that we know get us off as quickly as possible. It looks like a 2 to 3 minute exploration that includes masturbation and ends with a peak experience called ejaculation. And that's what we've known how to do. And the reasons for that is another separate conversation, but I think it has a lot to do with guilt and shame. We felt this powerful, pleasurable force in our body. We wanted to explore it, but we felt guilty. We didn't want our partners to catch us doing it. We didn't want our parents to know. Whatever that is, that's become the way of doing it. But what that does is, whenever I am expecting that my partner is going to turn me on, or that I need to run fantasy in my head, or that I choose to watch porn to activate my sexual life force, I'm outsourcing my power to somebody else. It means that I'm not able to activate myself fully. So even in a relationship, I believe men should be self-activated. It's not my partner's responsibility to turn me on. I should be able to turn myself on, and then I come as a fully activated being into this relationship. And from a full and powerful place, we can connect intimately from there. So the self-pleasuring practice is huge. And I think a self-pleasuring practice should take place irrespective of the relationship status that you're in. So even in a space of conscious celibacy, I think you should still be practicing conscious self-pleasuring without running fantasies, without watching porn, being with yourself, becoming your own best lover. When you're in a marriage, whether it's open or closed or whatever your sexual connections are, I think you should still be making sure that you're your own best lover first, so that when you choose to get intimate with your wife or your lovers, that you're coming from this full and self-activated place. Because anything else is, as you said earlier, it is giving your power away. It's like, I don't know how to do this. You turn me on. And that makes it all your responsibility. And again, pretty unsexy place to relate from.
I love that you're talking about how to get there without an external source. Like, I appreciate this conversation because you're right. A lot of people don't understand that, and they don't. I know I had a challenge as a woman when I was reconnecting to my body, learning how to isolate the muscles in the vagina, learning how to isolate and pump the muscles in the anus, and really getting in touch with the entire body and being able to explore pressure, explore everything, and explore the sensation. There is so much shame around that, when in reality, how do we communicate our needs and our desires to a partner if we're not willing to explore that aspect of ourselves? And if we're scared and shamed about touching ourselves, it's really fascinating that at one point in our lives, we wanted someone else to do to us what we were too scared to do to ourselves. Or explore on one aspect, or the shame around that, and then to be given permission or to sit in that space of exploration and orgasm and self-pleasure and self-care and self-love, and understand that that is actually an essential part of our humanness and our health and our wellness and our well-being, to be able to have conscious relationships around sexual pleasure and orgasms, and learning, and the smells, and tasting our smells, and understanding that all of this isn't scary, and it's actually who we are, and it's actually erotic and exciting when done in sacred space and enjoying oneself. And yeah, when we actually understand and explore that aspect, it can be extremely empowering and fun.
Yeah, all of that. There's also something for me in the recognition of, our sexual life force is also our creative life force. Like the intimate engagement of two people making love, the process of what happens in conception that has the creative power to bring another human being into this realm is fucking mind-blowing and a miracle in itself. The fact that we should feel guilt and shame around that is just a crime that I really want to help. This is my work, to help people reframe and let go of that. But what also happens is, if you're not conscious of the powerful energy that you have access to through your sexual life force, whether it's through self-pleasuring, I think your self-pleasuring practice should be part of your manifestation process. It's like, not only are you not outsourcing your most important energy to YouPorn or some Pornhub bullshit, like for commercialization. Just think about how fucked up that is. But you're actually using this really powerful life force that is strong enough to create another human being, while holding a prayer for yourself, for your future partner, for the apartment that you want, for the life that you want to create. Like, that's a really fucking powerful energy to use in the process of manifesting the life that you want. And so, until we get that, you're disconnecting yourself from your most important and most creative, powerful source, and giving it to YouPorn or an ex-girlfriend that you made love to 25 years ago that you're never going to connect with again, or somebody that you didn't get to connect with. It's a waste of your most precious life force. And if you're carrying guilt and shame around your sexual energy as well, you're also carrying guilt and shame around your creative life force. This is the same life force that you can use to allocate towards your project, to creative ideas, to the gifts that you're meant to bring to the world. Disconnect yourself from that at your own peril, because it's a complete power drain from one of your most creative forces that you have access to.
Well, and that leads me to the next observation of when I shifted my sexual energy to something that was much more empowering. I noticed that it also led me to different eating patterns and different expression patterns, different everything patterns, because as I raised the energy and had a different relationship with it, I learned the connection between the food I eat and the nourishment, because it's nourishing the emotions, it's nourishing the sexual energy, and it's how in relation every single aspect of what we're doing is when we have a healthy relationship with that energy, since it is, like as you said, the life force energy, and it's the root of everything that we're doing.
Yep. And I think you said it as well. I think a lot of disease is a function of just stagnancy in the body, and so if there's not a good flow of energy of blood, let's say through your muscles because you're not moving them, the same is true for the sexual energy that's perhaps not moving in your body if you're choosing not to move your sexual life force. So, there's a lot of healing that comes from using sex as a tool to be able to heal, and it's a whole field of work that you can really use to create healing in the body as a function of reconnecting with that and moving that energy consciously through your body.
Yeah, I'm hearing you on that, and I could go on for hours about that. But you are absolutely, yes, that's a whole nother segue. But that life force energy does change everything, and the patterns, when we do not understand and work with the energy, it does become disease and blocks. And the sooner that we understand that, and that we understand what you're saying and do the work that we both offer, yeah, disease patterns, communication patterns, everything changes when we actually do the work. I have noticed in myself visceral effects and seeing the ripple effect. And they say that it's 7 generations ahead, 7 generations behind that we heal. But I've actually experienced and witnessed the ripple effect. Are you experiencing and noticing the ripple effect and the generational effect as you do this work as well, and how that affects you and your family?
Yeah, I think so. Just bringing awareness to this conversation, being able to have conversations like this, friends and family that I love are going to listen to this conversation. And I think we're touching on subjects that weren't spoken about. And, just the awareness of this and the fact that these conversations are becoming more and more mainstream, I think is healing, and you can go deep. There is a lot of work and wounding to do around these parts. And there's also a way to be able to suppress people if you suppress them from their creative life force. Like, so if you want to go down that rabbit hole of how to control people, just tell them that their most powerful life force is off limits and a bad idea, and then you can, cut somebody off from a really important part of their power. So yeah, I definitely see that. But what I've also noticed is just as you start to do really simple things, like first of all, be okay with it. Part of my journey, my healing journey has been okay with recognizing and accepting that my sexual desire is sacred. So if you have a story that, I was led to believe that I should really save my sexual energy for one partner, I'd get married to that partner, and that would be it. That message was given to me with love from the caregivers that I had, who I love dearly, and that's not my truth. That's not what was true in my body at the time. And so I sat with this polarity of like, this is what I want to do, connect with multiple people because it feels delicious and I want to explore it. But some part of me had the voice of a caregiver being like, this is not what you're allowed to do or supposed to do. And so this created a polarity inside. So just getting to this place of being like, okay, humanity, we realize that collectively we've got a very immature relationship with sexuality. We don't like to talk about it. We think it's naughty. We can watch somebody blowing off somebody else's head on a movie, but we can't watch people making love. That doesn't get shown on television. That's fucked up. But just the fact that we have a collective immaturity around this and we say, okay, cool. I do want to connect with multiple people. Can I be grown up enough to, first of all, own that desire? And then have I got the tools to be able to speak to my partners about what it is that I truly want and be okay with the desires outside of what you think, you know, people are going to think about you is such an important step. One piece. The second piece is like, there's a really simple communication framework that you can share with somebody, and I'll maybe give you something practical that your audience can use right now. I learned this at a week-long retreat called the International School of Temple Arts. They are a Tantra school and a mystery school. Been hugely instrumental in my own personal growth journey. And they teach this tool called RBDSM. And it's an acronym that you use when you're about to have a conversation or a connection with somebody that looks like it's leading towards intimacy. that just creates a really safe space for you to have a conversation. So let's say, for example, Willow and I are on a date. We're potentially going to go home together. We've arrived home together. Before we just get into this place of like, let's just flow and go, the energy's alive, let's see how it unfolds, to check in with one another. So R is like, I would model first, what is my relationship status? And I would share my current relationship status and my agreements as they are. So I would say that I'm in a monogamous relationship, for example. Well, if we were about to connect, I wouldn't say that, but I'd be like, I'm in an open relationship. I have a primary partner, but I'm open to exploring with you. What is your relationship status? You would then share where you are. We could see if there's a fit there, where there's a resonance for us to be able to connect. The next would be D. These are the desires. What do we want from this connection? Okay, I'm open to coming home with you. Let's do some massage. I'm open to kissing, but I'm not looking for penetrative sex. What about your desires? That sounds good. I'm open to that. I would be open to these things. So you get to own your desires of what you're actually looking for from this engagement. The next one is called B. This is for boundaries. What are the actual boundaries? Okay, because of my current relationship agreements, these potential opportunities are off limits for me. You get to share yours. S is a safer sex conversation. Are we going to be using some sort of protection? When did you last do a sexual health test? Like, have this grown up conversation before you connect with somebody, and have this just be in the field. Have a conversation like a grown up, not just figuring it out at the last minute. Do we need a condom? Like that type of stuff. Just have this conversation up front. And then the last piece is an M, which stands for meaning. So before we connect, like, what is this going to mean to you? We've been on one date. We're now going to potentially explore this beautiful connection that we've taken the time to have this conversation and unpack. To me, this means a one-time connection because I'm going back to see my partner, or my partner and I are looking to connect with somebody else. So this, I'm looking for meaning that looks like multiple connections with you over the next few weeks and months. What does this mean to you? If we don't find resolution on the meaning, we can very easily see whether this is going to be a, a connection that's worth exploring. Like, I fucking wish we had learned this shit in school, because I went through my whole life of relating with people guessing, absolutely guessing. And not only does it not create safety in the field, but like there's this energy moving and no one quite knows what to do. And we're sort of excited, but also sort of scared. I have no idea what you want when we get home. So we sort of maybe start to kiss, maybe things explode, maybe you pulling back. There's so much that can be resolved by just having a grown up conversation that follows this simple framework, RBDSM. It's going to take you 10 minutes. It's going to feel uncomfortable the first few times you do it, but there's something so juicy about having a space where everybody knows where the edges are. We know what we can do in the space. We know what it means. We know what's going to happen if there's going to be, penetration. We're going to use a condom. We're not. Whatever those conversations are, we've had them already. Now you can really expand, and you've approached the whole thing like a grown-up as opposed to just guessing. So yeah, that's like a simple framework that I wish we could use. And there's other tools like this that I think we want to get more and more into the mainstream conversation, so that people are not left guessing as 45-year-old grown-ups, relating as teenagers, worried that mom's going to come in, or just too afraid to have the conversation, or just not prepared. So yeah, how this affects the ancestral line, I definitely think does support it, because as you said, when we do the work of improving sexual stuff, our wound around money, our wound around scarcity, our wound around racism, homophobia, all of that stuff, I think it does definitely heal up and down the line.
That was powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That um, was a definite gift to anyone watching this, RBDSM, and really having conscious conversations around what experience are we co-creating versus allowing the experience to happen and then acting like a victim, or feeling ghosted, or avoiding, and all of the patterns that come up of shame, guilt, misunderstanding when one does not approach it consciously. And so really understanding the power of the work that you are doing, and what someone choosing to work with one of your workshops and go deeper into this work. If you are watching this and really understand the value of what Gareth just shared, imagine how much you will get from actually working with him on an extended for an extended period, and really going deeper into that, understanding it, and then practicing those conversations. I know in this work, a lot of I know in my own experience, I could conceptualize it, And I wanted to have these conversations, but I couldn't. Like, I was so, to move through my fear, to move through my shame, like I would cry, I would choke on my words, I could not speak clearly. And so a lot of the work you do too is help, not only helping people understand and get to the root of this core, but then really learn how to move to express it differently, because it, creating the new pattern, creating the new conversation takes work. It's not something that we just conceptualize and then it happens. Like, we actually have to practice and practice. And what I'm hearing from you too is that you really open up this sacred and safe space to have these really scary conversations, because the first probably 20 times it came out of my mouth, it did not come out in the way that I intended it to. And I'm assuming that you experienced that as well, that it's kind of like, it just has to get out, and then we have to keep working on the vocal cords, working on the tone, working on the speed.
Yeah, it's practice. These conversations do require, it's like a muscle. The first few times you've done it, it doesn't feel easy. But what I can share is, much like I said earlier, you can choose your hard. To have that hard conversation before connecting with somebody really does make the rest of the evening so much more expansive, because suddenly I know where you are. I know what you want. I'm not left guessing when it comes down to the moment of, moving to the next stage. And yeah, I've only experienced more expansive relationships by having a conversation that I felt contracted in the moment. But that's just a little bit of fear to get through it. But every time I've had that, it's really opened up a space of real safety, because I love that you said ghosted. Ghosted comes from you expecting that I'm going to phone you tomorrow. I'm thinking this is a one night stand. We never spoke about it. That would have been covered in meaning, because the meaning for me is one night stand. You're like, I'm hope. And then once we get to that point, you can be like, all right, cool. If that's where you are, then I'm only open for X, Y, and Z. And you can change this. This is a dynamic container that you're creating, so that there's no like expectations that are not going to be unmet, that I need to feel like I need to withdraw. In some ways, that's 7-year-old relating. That's like, I kissed you behind the bike shed, and the second break you were kissing somebody else. Fuck, we didn't talk about that. That's 7-year-old behavior. We're grown-ups now, and it's our responsibility to have these conversations, to create safe, juicy spaces to be able to explore the sexual energy with the beings that come into our life. Let's do it. Let's learn about this stuff. Take responsibility for it, because yeah, anything else is an immature expression of something that's really, really beautiful. And it's time to let that shit go. Eh?
Beautiful. So the more that we are willing to invest in our own experience, no matter what that experience is, up front, by talking about it, planning for it, having a conversation, and moving into it openly and consciously, the more pleasant the experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think it just brings back to what we were talking about earlier, is how conscious are we when we choose to move into a sexual encounter? And I can share from my own experience, a lot of my relating has been completely unconsciously. In fact, I can share, and I'm not proud of this, part of my strategy was to use alcohol so that I could feel like confident, which basically just meant that I just lost my inhibition and my ability to ground myself. But a part of me was also like, if my partner's drunk enough, her inhibition will be gone as well, and then I'll have a chance to be able to score. And I feel uncomfortable even owning that now, but that was my plan. Like, that's fucking not a plan. That's unconscious relating. That's not bringing awareness and celebrating the beauty of what's potentially alive in this field. And yeah, I'm not saying exclude alcohol, but I definitely don't suggest it as a strategy. I would rather you have a clear communication plan that establishes a beautiful container for you to be able to see what's genuinely alive and explore it from there.
I really appreciate you saying that. I'm actually 10 years sober, and I used to work with alcohol too, to lower my inhibition and help me feel comfortable in my body. So as ashamed or uncomfortable as I am to talk about how I used to connect to, it also offers both of us the contrast and the clarity on understanding the difference. I don't know that I would have really comprehend the value of the intimacy and sacredness that I co-create and demand and command now, if I did not have those experiences to really help me understand how unconscious or unconnected from myself and powerless or unconscious of my own experience. Like, it really helped me understand what I do want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we relate at the level of awareness that we have, and I
Hmm.
know the version of me that was at that place. I was super disconnected from myself. I didn't know what I wanted. I had a lot of guilt and shame around my intimacy. And it's been a journey. And this is what we said at the beginning. We're a continual work in progress, And yeah, we've got to love and accept those versions of ourselves from the past. I have had to reconcile and be okay with the versions of me that, had a strategy to get others as drunk as possible so that I could get laid. Fuck, it sounds uncomfortable even saying it now. And I have to love and recognize that version of myself as part of my journey that got me to the awakening of where I am now. 10 years from now, I'm going to listen to this podcast and be like, dude, you were so green. Welcome to life. That's the nature of being on a personal growth journey, is that every single time you grow and evolve, there's going to be a version of you that didn't know what you know today. And yeah, and that's okay. Yeah.
And thank you for
But
being willing to share that version because it's so beautiful and it's such a gift to all of us.
yeah, yeah, but it's when you put those parts into separation that you start to leak energy. It's the part of you that doesn't want to listen to the wounded child. It's the part of you that thinks you're an asshole because of how you were 5 years ago or the choices that you made. It all has to do with just radical love and radical self-acceptance and forgiveness. Like you're a human being that's figuring it out as you go. So love yourself unconditionally, accept the parts of yourself, even if you cringe because you've evolved to a different version of yourself now. Beautiful. That's the journey.
And Gareth, thank you for sharing all of this. Tell our viewers and whoever's watching this a little bit more. Remind us what's coming up for you. I know you have a big event that you're promoting and inviting people into, and how to get connected to you, and kind of what you're offering and what it's like working with you.
Thank you. All of my work is at garethpickering.com. All of my social links to the podcast is all there. At the moment, we're promoting a series of trainings called Kings and Queens. It's really a five-part group training process that's going to really bring men and women together to touch on some of these relational themes. We're going to be looking at relationship endings. That first series is called Relationship Reflections, and we're going to touch on some of the magic that comes from the past relationships that we've had and how to integrate those. And then another five webinars that are going to touch on similar things. We're going to talk about relationship agreements. We're going to dive into conscious communication. We're going to talk about conscious selection, the selection process of how to define what it is that you're looking for a relationship, so that if you're in the process of moving into a relationship, that you can develop a list of things that would really support you so that you move consciously into your connections. And then also some elements that would support those that are already in relationships. So whether you're already in a partnership and feel like you need some tools to help support having these difficult conversations, it's all going to be inside this Kings and Queens series. So we can share some links for that inside the show notes. But yeah, that journey is really an opportunity for men and women to come together. We'll journey through those five series of trainings together. At the end of that, we're going to break men and women into two separate containers, two coaching containers. The men are going to train with myself and dear brother, my sex coach. His name's Leonard Lowe. Him and I have been co-creating for the last few years, and we're going to be running a men's relationship container. We have a female relationship coach that's going to be guiding the women through a series of coaching along a very similar path, but it seems, from what I can tell, you know, men journey in a very different way in a container that's just got male energy in the space. One single female body shifts the entire energy of the container. So we'll do an opening circle together. We'll both go down these individual coaching containers and then do a closing circle together at the end. And that's coming, and it's the first time we're running it in that specific way. So I'm really excited to see, because you've had really good feedback. And what feels good is every time we do the men's relationship coaching, a lot of women are like, yay, bring all the conscious men. And then we have men in our container that are like, where are all these women? So I'm really excited to, co-create this together, because I think we're going to have a lot of beings that are, yeah, similarly focused on showing up fully for themselves so that they can show up fully in their relationships, whether you're calling in partnership or already in partnership, or maybe even just going out of a relationship ending. There's going to be some value for you in this series, and we'll put the details in the show notes.
Thank you so thank you so much, Gareth. I'm so excited for you. And yes, everything will be there. Is there any final words you would like to leave for us?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I think death is such a in the West, it's such a taboo topic. I was very frightened of death when I was growing up, and I had this sense that born into a conservative Christian home, I was like, I'm not so sure that this God thing really works for me. So I sort of pushed it aside as my own strategy for making sense of reality and as a young person. But it wasn't an easy way to live. And yeah, just the beauty that comes from knowing that this we have a finite time on this planet is what gives it magic. This is what makes life really, really meaningful, and it really gives me an opportunity to reflect on the choices that I make every single day and to make the most out of every single moment. And so, yeah, for me, that has a lot to do with relationships. How am I showing up in my relationships? How am I continually showing up and doing my own internal work so that I can show up as the best version of me for my romantic partners, for the leader that I want to be in my business, but for these types of conversations as well. And so, yeah, I just want to say thanks for bringing that, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your support and your attention.